I found a hidden room no one knew about. What was inside will shock you. You're not going to believe this, but I recently discovered something in my house that completely turned my world upside down. I've lived here for years, and I thought I knew every nook and cranny. I thought my family and I had explored every inch of the place, from the attic to the basement. But I was wrong, very wrong. What I found was a hidden room. And no, I'm not talking about a secret closet or a crawl space. This was an entire room, completely sealed off from the rest of the house, hidden behind a wall. And when I opened it, well, that's when things took a turn I wasn't prepared for. What I found inside this room will blow your mind, and it's something I can't forget. Let me give you some context. I've been living in my family's house for years, and honestly, I thought I had seen every corner of it. It wasn't a mansion or anything crazy, but it was a comfortable old house with a lot of history. My parents bought it when I was young, and we've all grown up here, but recently we had been doing some renovations. Nothing major, just updating the kitchen, replacing some old flooring, and clearing out some of the clutter. It was one of those projects that starts small but somehow expands into an entire house overhaul. I guess you could say we were getting to know the house all over again, uncovering things that had been buried under layers of time. I was working on cleaning out the old bookshelf in the living room when I noticed something strange. One of the shelves seemed to have a slight gap behind it. It was so subtle that at first, I thought it was just the unevenness of the wall or the way the shelf was hung. But something about it didn't sit right with me. I pulled the shelf forward, half expecting dust to fall everywhere. But instead of the usual pile of forgotten books, I felt something give way. Almost like I had triggered something hidden behind the shelf. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. I froze. At first I thought maybe the house was just settling, but there was no mistaking it. The noise came from behind the wall. My curiosity was piqued, and without wasting any more time, I removed the shelf completely, revealing a small, almost imperceptible door embedded in the wall. It looked like part of the original construction, a hidden panel designed to blend seamlessly with the rest of the room. I gently pressed on the panel, and to my shock, it opened. The door creaked as it revealed an entirely dark, narrow hallway leading to something I couldn't see. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what I had just found. I called out, expecting someone to be home, but my family had all stepped out for the day. The house was empty, except for me, and whatever lay behind this door. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and ventured in. The hallway was tight, barely wide enough to move through without brushing against the walls. As I moved deeper into the space, the air grew colder. There was an odd smell in the air, musty and old, like something had been sealed off for a long time. I turned the corner and found myself facing an actual room, small but definitely a room. It was dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, and the walls were lined with old, weathered wooden panels. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The room was packed with piles of old furniture, crates, and dust-covered objects I couldn't immediately identify. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, maybe even longer, but what stood out the most were the boxes. There were boxes stacked high, most of them old and falling apart, but a few were still sealed tight. And sitting right in the center of the room was an old chest made of dark wood with metal latches that had seen better days. It wasn't until I got closer that I noticed something off about the chest. On top, there was an engraving, an old, faded design that looked like a family crest. My first instinct was to open it, but something stopped me. I don't know what it was, but the room felt strange. There was something in the air that made my skin crawl, a feeling I couldn't shake off. But my curiosity was stronger. I pulled open the chest, my hands trembling. And inside? Well, that's where things took a turn. I pulled the chest open, the hinges creaking loudly, and what I saw inside completely floored me. At first, it looked like an assortment of old books, dusty papers, and a few trinkets scattered across the bottom. But when I moved some of the papers aside, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. There, in the corner of the chest, was a photograph, faded and yellowed with age. The image was black and white, but I immediately recognized the faces of my grandparents. They were standing together, smiling, in front of the very house I had grown up in. The photo looked decades old, possibly from when my grandparents had first moved into the house. But what caught me off guard was the handwritten note on the back of the photo. It was in my grandmother's handwriting. I could barely make out the words, but there was something about them that chilled me. The note simply said, Not everything in this house is what it seems. Some secrets are better left buried. I stared at the photo for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was holding. It was as if my grandmother had known something hidden, something about this house that I wasn't supposed to uncover. But I didn't stop there. No, I had to keep looking. My fingers trembled as I dug further into the chest. There were more letters, sealed with wax, old journals, and other objects I couldn't immediately identify. But one thing was clear. My family had been hiding something big. Among the papers, there was a key, old and tarnished. It had a strange symbol carved into it, one that I'd never seen before. It looked like some sort of family crest, similar to the one engraved on the chest. This key, though, wasn't for any door in my house. At least, not one I knew about. I stood there, holding the key in my hand, my mind racing. What had my grandparents been involved in, and why hadn't anyone ever mentioned these secrets? I felt a sense of dread wash over me. Was I meant to find this? Or had I unearthed something I wasn't supposed to? As I sat there, staring at the key and the old photo, a heavy silence filled the room. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line, like I had just uncovered a hidden part of my family's past that wasn't meant for me to know. But I had already opened this door. There was no going back now. I turned to look at the pile of old journals scattered on the floor. Something about them seemed to call to me. I couldn't resist. I grabbed the closest one and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was familiar, and as I read, I realized it was my grandmother's. The first entry was dated July 1952, and as I skimmed through the pages, I learned that my grandparents had been involved in some strange activities around that time. Activities that went far beyond regular family life. They talked about the meetings and the cryptic mentions of the pact and the group. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I read on. They were talking about a secret society, one that my family had been part of for generations. According to the journal, my grandparents had joined this society when they first moved into the house. The group was involved in things that sounded unnatural. They had been tasked with protecting something in the house, something that was hidden, something my grandparents believed was dangerous if ever uncovered. The more I read, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a family secret, it was a legacy, passed down through the generations. The deeper I delved into the journal, the more disturbing the details became. According to my grandmother's writings, my family wasn't just protecting a physical object, they were guarding something much darker. The pact they had made was with a group of powerful people, and it involved the house itself. They wrote about something hidden beneath the house, a sacred artifact, sealed away for centuries. They referred to it as the heart of the house, and they warned that if it was ever disturbed, unimaginable consequences would follow. The journal mentioned strange rituals, and the secrecy that surrounded this artifact was so intense that even my grandparents had only been allowed to know the basics. It was clear that the artifact held an ancient power, one that could be harnessed for both good or evil. The last few entries in the journal were written in a more hurried, almost panicked tone. My grandmother described feeling like they were being watched, like the society was no longer just a group of protectors, but something far more sinister. She mentioned that my parents had never been told about the artifact, but she feared that someone might eventually try to force the secret out of them. I couldn't process everything I was reading, but one thing was clear. My family had kept these secrets from me, for good reason. They hadn't just been protecting a treasure, they had been keeping me safe from something far darker. I couldn't stop thinking about the journal. I'd barely skimmed through it all, but I already felt like I had uncovered enough to make my blood run cold. The artifact, the pact, the secrecy. My grandparents had kept so much hidden from me, and the more I thought about it, the more I felt like I had to know the truth. I had no choice now. I had to find out what was really going on in this house. As I turned the last pages of the journal, I noticed a sketch of the house's floor plan. It was an old hand-drawn map, but what stood out was a small symbol beneath the main floor, an X that marked a spot beneath the house itself, hidden somewhere deep within the foundations. The description beside the map simply read, "The heart of the house lies beneath. No one should ever go there." But the next sentence caught my attention. If you do, you must be prepared to face what's buried below. I knew deep down that I had to go there. Whatever my grandparents had hidden in the basement, whatever this artifact was, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I grabbed the flashlight and headed down to the basement. The house creaked around me, the air thick with the smell of dust and old wood. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I surveyed the area. The basement was exactly what you'd expect: crates, old furniture, tools, and an eerie stillness that made my skin crawl. But I didn't come here for any of that. I was looking for something specific. I searched along the walls, knocking on them, testing for hollow spots. Finally, after what felt like hours of searching, my knuckles hit a different sound, something deeper. I pulled the shelf away from the wall and found a small hidden door, barely visible. It was locked, but something inside me pushed me forward. I found the key I had discovered in the chest earlier and tried it in the lock. It clicked. The door opened with a creak, revealing a narrow passageway leading further into the darkness. The narrow passageway stretched into the darkness, and the moment I stepped inside, I felt a cold breeze wash over me, as though the house itself was exhaling after years of being sealed off. I moved cautiously, the sound of my footsteps echoing around the stone walls. My flashlight flickered in my hand, and I briefly wondered if I was making a huge mistake. But the pull of curiosity, the need to uncover the truth, was stronger than my fear. The passage led me downward, further into the earth, and I found myself wondering just how deep the house went. The walls were lined with old, damp wood, and the air grew mustier the further I descended. The path was uneven, and I had to carefully navigate around loose stones and broken floorboards. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of excitement and dread. What was I going to find down here? Was I prepared for the truth? At the end of the tunnel, the passage opened into a small chamber. The air here was thick with dust, and cobwebs clung to every corner. In the center of the room stood a large stone pedestal, covered in layers of dirt and grime, as if it had been untouched for centuries. My flashlight flickered again, and when it came back on, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. On top of the pedestal was a box, ornate and intricately designed, with a strange symbol on the lid. It was the same symbol I had seen on the key and the engraving on the chest upstairs, the family crest. But there was something unsettling about it now. The box wasn't just an artifact, it was a container, and whatever was inside, it felt like it was meant to stay locked away. My hands shook as I approached it, knowing that opening it could change everything, but I couldn't leave without knowing what my family had kept hidden from me. I gently lifted the box from the pedestal and felt a strange, almost magnetic pull, as though the box itself was inviting me to open it. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Slowly I removed the lid, and as I did, a cold, almost unnatural chill filled the room. Inside the box was an object wrapped in faded cloth. I carefully unwrapped it, revealing what was inside, a stone tablet, covered in strange, ancient symbols. It was heavier than I expected, and the moment I touched it, I felt a jolt of energy shoot through me, like a shockwave that left my hands numb. I couldn't explain what happened next. My vision blurred for a moment, and I stumbled back, dropping the tablet onto the stone floor. For a few seconds, I could only stand there, gasping for air, trying to make sense of the overwhelming sensation that had just surged through me. It was as if something ancient and powerful had just awakened. The walls of the room seemed to shift around me, and I could feel the house itself reacting to the tablet, reacting to the long-hidden truth finally coming to light. I took a moment to compose myself, wiping the sweat from my brow. There was no way this was a coincidence. My grandparents had kept this hidden for a reason. Whatever this tablet was, it had a purpose, something far beyond what I could understand in that moment. But there was no turning back now. I carefully picked up the tablet again, feeling its weight, and examined the symbols etched into its surface. They were completely unfamiliar to me, but the more I looked at them, the more they felt oddly familiar, like I'd seen them before in a dream or some distant memory I couldn't quite place. I was about to study them further when I heard a noise behind me. I turned around quickly, flashlight in hand, and froze. The doorway to the passage was now blocked, and standing in the entrance was my mother. She was staring at me with a mixture of shock and fear, her face pale and eyes wide. "Mom?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" She didn't respond at first. She just stood there, looking at me, as if trying to figure out what to say. But then she stepped forward, her eyes never leaving the tablet in my hands. Her voice was low and strained when she finally spoke. "You shouldn't have found that," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't want you to know. None of us did." "Know what? What's going on?" I demanded, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. What is this tablet? Why was it hidden here? And why didn't anyone tell me about any of this? She swallowed hard, her hands shaking. It's a legacy we've been keeping for generations, she said, taking a step closer. Your grandparents, your great-grandparents, none of them wanted you to get involved. They thought you were too young, that you wouldn't understand the danger. But now it's too late. Danger? I repeated, my heart racing. What danger? What is this tablet? And what does it have to do with our family? She took a deep breath, finally meeting my gaze. This house, this family, it's all tied to something much bigger than we ever realized. The tablet isn't just an artifact, it's a key to something ancient. The tension in the air was palpable. I stood there, holding the tablet in my hands, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for my mom to continue. The weight of her words hung heavy in the room, and I could feel the house around me vibrating with the anticipation of what was to come. She walked over to me slowly, her steps deliberate, and when she reached me, she placed a trembling hand on the tablet. This, she said softly, isn't just some old artifact. It's the key to something much bigger, something that's been hidden in our family for generations. I stared at her, trying to make sense of what she was saying. A key? To what? My mom hesitated, looking at the tablet as if it were a living, breathing thing. To an ancient power, she whispered. A force that has been buried under this house for centuries. The society that your grandparents and great-grandparents were a part of. They weren't just protecting the artifact. They were guarding something much darker. I was confused. Darker? What do you mean? She took a deep breath, clearly trying to calm herself before she spoke again. When your great-grandparents first moved into this house, they didn't just buy property. They found something, a hidden chamber beneath the foundations, a place that had been sealed for centuries. The artifact, this tablet, was the key to unlocking that chamber. But they were warned. The power within that chamber could be unleashed, and once it was, there would be no going back. A chill ran through me. My hands tightened around the tablet. So why are we here? Why didn't anyone tell me about this? You were never meant to find it, my mom replied, her voice shaking. Your grandparents were determined to keep it hidden. They thought if you knew, you'd be drawn to it. And they didn't want you to bear the burden of what might come next. I looked at her, my mind racing. But why is it so dangerous? What is inside the chamber? What's the power we're talking about? My mom's eyes darkened, and I could see the fear in them. I don't know everything. The society kept the full details from me, too. But what I do know is that it's alive. The power inside that chamber is ancient and has been waiting for centuries to be awakened. If it's unleashed, it could change everything. It could bring chaos, destruction, and we've been the ones keeping it at bay all this time. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. The idea of something so powerful being buried beneath the house was almost too much to comprehend. My family, my parents, my grandparents, they had been hiding this secret, protecting me from it. And now I had stumbled upon it. What happens if I open the chamber? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You can't. My mom's voice was firm, almost desperate. You have to leave it alone, Sarah. I'm begging you. Don't unlock whatever is in there. The moment you do, it will be too late. I glanced at the tablet again, the strange symbol still glowing faintly in the dim light of the basement. There was a magnetic pull to it, an undeniable urge to find out more. But my mom's warning hung in the air, and I couldn't shake the feeling that if I continued down this path, there would be no turning back. I couldn't let it go. My mom's warnings echoed in my head, but the curiosity, the drive to understand what my family had been protecting for so long was too strong. I couldn't simply leave it buried. What if there was more to this than what my mother was telling me? What if the chamber, the artifact, could help me unlock something about my family's past that I didn't understand? I looked at my mom, who was visibly distressed, her face pale, her hands shaking. Mom, I need to know. I have to understand why this has been kept from me. Why would the society go to such lengths to keep this hidden? She didn't respond right away, but I could see the internal struggle on her face. You don't understand. There are rules. This artifact, it's not meant for anyone outside the society to touch. It has been sealed for a reason. I took a deep breath. But I'm not part of the society, and I don't care about the rules. This is my family's legacy. I have a right to know what's going on. She stepped back, her eyes filled with tears. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. You have no idea what's inside that chamber." I felt the weight of her words, but I wasn't backing down. My mind was made up. I'm going to open it. I'm going to see what's down there. Before she could stop me, I turned and walked toward the small entrance leading deeper into the house. The walls seemed to close in around me, but I ignored it. I had to know what was inside the chamber. I had to know what had been kept hidden for so long. The key was in my hand, and with it, I had the power to unlock the past. I approached the wall where the entrance was hidden and pressed the key into a small slot near the base. There was a loud click, and the ground beneath my feet seemed to tremble. Slowly, a section of the stone wall began to shift, revealing a narrow staircase descending into an even darker space. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of my decision pressing down on me, but then I descended the stairs, the flashlight beam shaking as I moved deeper into the darkness. The air grew colder, and the sound of my footsteps echoed in the silence. At the bottom of the stairs, I found another door, one that looked as old as the house itself. The key fit perfectly into the lock, and with a deep breath, I turned it. The door creaked open, revealing the room beyond. I pushed the door open, and the first thing I felt was the air, thick and heavy, like it had been sealed for centuries. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from my flashlight, casting long shadows across the walls. The space was vast, stretching far beyond what I had imagined. It wasn't just a small room, it was a hidden chamber, buried deep beneath the house, filled with relics I couldn't begin to understand. As I stepped forward, my flashlight scanned the walls, revealing ancient symbols etched into the stone. They were similar to the ones on the tablet, but these were far more intricate, almost alive in their design. The air hummed with an unsettling energy, a low vibration that seemed to resonate with the stone around me. My breath caught in my throat. In the center of the room, on a raised pedestal, was a large stone altar, weathered by time but still imposing. And on that altar lay something that made my heart stop. A sphere, a perfectly smooth, obsidian-like orb that glowed faintly with an eerie light. The same strange symbol that had been on the key, the tablet, and even the chest was etched into the surface of the sphere, as though it was the focal point of all the mysteries surrounding this place. I slowly approached the altar, feeling an overwhelming sense of both awe and dread. There it was, the artifact my family had kept hidden for so long, the key to everything. I reached out tentatively, my fingers brushing against the cold surface of the sphere. The moment I touched it, the room seemed to shift. The walls vibrated, the air grew even colder, and I could hear a low hum growing louder. It felt as though the house itself was awakening. The moment I touched the orb, something inside me changed. My body froze, as if an invisible force was holding me in place. The ground beneath my feet seemed to rumble, and the walls around me seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. I could feel the weight of the room pressing down on me, and for a split second, I thought I was going to pass out. But I didn't. Instead, I saw visions, flickers of images and flashes of light that made my head spin. I saw the faces of my ancestors, standing in the very same chamber, performing rituals and speaking in tongues I didn't understand. There were symbols, more intricate and complex than the ones I'd seen earlier, swirling in the air around them, and as they moved, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The visions were too fast, too fragmented, but the one thing that stood out was the orb. It was always in the center of it all, glowing brighter with each passing moment. And then, the room went silent. I was no longer standing in the chamber alone. Figures, shadowy, ghostly figures, had materialized around me, standing motionless as if they had been waiting for me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. One of the figures stepped forward. It was a man, dressed in ancient ceremonial robes, his face obscured by a mask. But his eyes were clear, glowing with an otherworldly light. "You shouldn't have touched it," he said, his voice echoing in my mind. "You've awakened something ancient." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. My body felt frozen, as if I had no control over it. "The artifact you have unleashed is not just a key," the figure continued. "It is a curse, a force older than time itself. And now, it has claimed you." The words hit me like a hammer. The orb wasn't just an artifact, it was a curse, a power that had been sealed away for a reason. My mind raced with questions. What had I done? What was I supposed to do now? The figures surrounding me began to speak in unison, their voices resonating with the room. They chanted words in an ancient language, and the sound reverberated through my body, causing the air to thicken with pressure. I could feel the orb pulsing beneath my fingertips, like it was alive, drawing power from me. "You are not the first to awaken the curse," the masked figure said, his voice now colder. "Many before you have tried to unlock its power, but none have succeeded in controlling it. They became its vessels, and their souls were lost to it." I felt a chill run down my spine. I wanted to let go of the orb, but my hand wouldn't move. The curse was taking hold of me, binding me to the artifact in ways I couldn't understand. "Your family has guarded this secret for centuries," the figure continued, "but now you must make a choice. You can release the power, unleashing it upon the world, or you can bind it once more, ensuring that it never sees the light of day again." The weight of those words settled on my shoulders like a mountain. What was I supposed to do? The curse, this ancient power, had been hidden for a reason. But what would happen if I chose to bind it? Was it even possible? Was there a way to control something so powerful? The room was closing in on me. I could feel the walls pressing tighter, the air growing even colder. The figures were still watching, waiting for my decision. The weight of the orb in my hand felt heavier than ever. It pulsed with energy, like it was calling out to me, urging me to let go and release it. The choice seemed impossible, but deep down, I knew that I couldn't let this power escape. Whatever was inside the orb, whatever it could do, it was too dangerous. The world wasn't ready for it, and I wasn't sure I was either. With every ounce of willpower I had left, I pulled my hand away from the orb. The figures began to move closer, their presence overwhelming. They weren't happy with my decision, but I had made it. I was going to seal the power, and if that meant giving up the truth about my family's legacy, then that was the price I had to pay. I turned toward the altar, preparing to use the key to bind the orb once more. The ground shook beneath me, the walls groaning as if the house itself didn't want me to succeed. But I was determined. I placed the orb back on the pedestal, my hands shaking, and with a final push, I used the key to activate the seal. The orb pulsed one last time, sending a shockwave through the room. The figures surrounding me let out a collective cry, and as their forms began to fade, I felt the weight of the curse lift from my shoulders. The room went silent once again. But I knew that this wasn't the end. The power was still there, sealed away, waiting for someone else to come along and unlock it again. The artifact was no longer my burden to bear, but the consequences of what I had learned would stay with me forever. So, what would you have done in my place? Would you have released the power, knowing the dangers, or would you have done everything you could to stop it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.